Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
We're back. And for the first time since 1985, so is Zandvoort. And its eagerly anticipated banked corners amongst the dunes. The summer break kind of ended with something of a whimper in Belgium, I thought. But somewhat more normal service was resumed in the second race of this triple header. And Shane and I are going to look over all the main talking points of the race weekend. So Shane, peer through the thick orange smoke if you can and get us started.
Blimey. Right, so let's start with qualifying, where we had an eventful session with multiple drivers out of place and more than one driver coming off, causing red flags. Let's start with Russell and Latifi. So Russell, who clearly overcooked it into turn 13, coming off into the gravel, had a relatively lucky escape, if you ask me. Just clipping his right rear tyre, bouncing off the what looked like the advertising board, which took most of the impact. And he managed to get that car. Did he drive back to the pits after that incident? I think he did, didn't he? He got back to the pits unaided after that incident. Obviously, the session was red flag due to the nature of the track. Any kind of safety concern, it almost instantly goes to a red flag, especially during qualifying. And then this was Latifi's chance to show the world what he's made out of. They're both in Q2. Can Latifi go faster than Russell? Well, he certainly tried. And one thing he did do better was he came off a lot better. He absolutely collided with the wall, wrecking his Williams in spectacular fashion, which then red flagged the session again, and then ultimately bringing the session to a early end. So with a lot of cars, with a lot of drivers out of position, and a lot of cars coming off and causing red flags, it was a very interesting qualifying session. But what drivers stood out for you, Alex, in this session?
Yeah, definitely interesting seeing both Williams in the wall. And that Latifi especially rather spoilt a lot of opportunities for Q2. Norris, Stroll and Tsunoda all out in Q2 as a result of that red flag. I think the striking things for me were Perez and Vettel were the two big surprises out in Q1. Yep. There was some delay for the Red Bull coming out of the pit lane, but it appeared that Perez was told to push more on his outlap, and he didn't. And he missed the line by 1 second, I think. So, and this is kind of a similar thing that I think happened in Hungary, was it? Where they ended up behind the Mercedes and that kind of spoilt their lap. Perez didn't manage to get a final lap. So they seem to make a little bit of a strategy error for qualifying there. And, Red Bull should not be out in Q1, so not quite sure exactly what happened there. And Aston Martin also just struggling in general. Their season of ups and downs kind of continues. Vettel was out there. He had obviously had some problems earlier in practice as well. Whether that had hampered them at all, I don't know. But that was kind of a surprise. Fantastic lap from Antonio Giovinazzi as well. P7, that's his best ever qualifying performance. He's obviously trying to show what he's made of. I think Frederic Vasseur has told him that he's got like 3 races left to show him what he's got, and he certainly did that this weekend. He was a bit unlucky when it came to the race, but that qualifying lap was absolutely brilliant. And another great lap from Gasly as well. He's started in the top 6 in 10 out of the last 13 Grand Prix so far.
That's incredible.
So he is really throwing that AlphaTauri around. I did want to ask you about an incident that we had in qualifying, which was we had a bit of a disaster for Vettel before he may have contributed to him going out in Q1 as well. Should Mazepin have got a penalty for impeding Vettel? Because in the notes, the stewards took into account Vettel's comments that there were too many cars in one place. Although Mazepin himself felt that his teammate Schumacher deliberately blocked him, despite an understanding that it was Nikita's turn to be the first car in qualifying. So Vettel actually seemed to sway that. What did you make of that incident?
I think, it's a very interesting one. And I'm glad you mentioned about how the two Haas drivers, they've given their own individual thoughts and opinions on it, who should have gone first and whose turn was it to go. It's not the first time we've seen cars this year trip over each other towards the end of a qualifying session. The nature of the track, it's very narrow, it's very fast. Single file comes to mind in Sector 3. It was always going to happen. My thoughts go back to Austria and to Spain as well, where Nikita got caught out again. Do I think it should have been a penalty? I don't know. Maybe his engineer should have been on the radio. Obviously, I don't know if his engineer was on the radio. I should imagine he was, but maybe there should be more of an emphasis saying there is a fast car approaching. You need to be single file or off the racing line, whatever is the racing line nowadays, because that's what I love about Zandvoort. There's so many different interpretations of the line, but we'll talk about that later on. It's a real hard one to call. I guess, yeah, it's the last corner. Well, technically, it's the penultimate corner. 13 and 14 are two different corners on this track, but yeah, I don't know. Is it penalty worthy? I think it's an honest mistake. You know, but it has impacted Sebastian Vettel's qualifying session, so punishment should be given out. I don't really know, Alex. I'm a bit lost on this one. Do you have any? What's your direction? What do you think?
Certainly, Vettel, despite it hurting him, he seemed quite happy for it not to be a penalty, seeing as he swayed them the other way. I think the story seems to be that it was supposed to be Nikita's turn in front because they were taking it in turns to go first in the qualifying session, and Schumacher thought Mazepin was going too slowly, and over the radio he asked his engineer if he could overtake him, and his engineer said yes. So obviously some kind of miscommunication going on there. But yeah, I don't really think it's a penalty, to be honest, because like you said, it's just one of those miscommunications, and you know, it wouldn't have helped Vettel to penalise Haas. Like, what difference would have that made, really? And also, it's hard to say exactly what is being penalised, really. I mean, impeding a lap, I suppose, but like you said, the nature of the track means people tend to line up there as they go out.
Yeah.
You just end up with these rather grey situations where it's hard to say. So I think the stewards probably called this one about right.
It's interesting, though, the decision they made, because if you look at the Spanish Grand Prix this year, Nikita almost did the exact same move. He was behind 3 or 4 cars on the last lap of the session. The clock was ticking down, and he wanted to go because he didn't feel like he was going to make it. And he pulled out and got in the way of Lando Norris, I think it was, or some other driver, and got a penalty for it. So a very similar incident happened today, and no penalty was given. Now, I remember thinking back to the Spanish Grand Prix, or when we recorded it, I thought it was quite harsh. So I'm glad no penalty was given today, because on reflection and listening to your comments, I do believe it was just an accident. And it's just racing, or should I say, it's just qualifying. It's just one of those things. But a little bit of inconsistency with the FIA throughout the same season with regards to like penalties and during qualifying. So that just needs to be ironed out, especially going forward into next year.
Was the Spain one? Was he entirely on his? Was it just of his own volition? Like were there no other cars involved?
There were 3 cars in front of him, all queuing, going really slow. In the chicane, chicane.
I remember now.
And he pulled out. And I remember thinking he's well within his right to try. I know there's a gentleman's agreement not to overtake cars, but if the time's running out and you need to put a lap in, then
he has a right to put a lap in too.
Yeah, exactly. It's not win the rules that you can't overtake a car in front of you because you're trying to stay pally with them. They have a right to put a lap in, like you said. So very similar incidents, 2 completely different outcomes, both of them polar opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's just the FIA.
Yeah, of course, the stewards, there's slightly different stewards between each race, aren't there? So there's also some literal inconsistency in the stewards. So it's a hard one to call. Maybe they have specific guidelines that we don't get to see. I hope not. I hope that they're just following exactly what it is, and it's just down to interpretation. But tough one to call. I think in those situations, unless somebody has deliberately done something quite dangerous, I think generally speaking, it doesn't seem to really help anyone to go around penalising people for it. It's not like you can, especially if someone's missed a lap, you can't give them the lap back, can you? So,
no, I completely agree.
So it was interesting qualifying. We had some surprises, people going out, but the headline story was, of course, that tiny difference between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton for the front row. If Verstappen hadn't improved that last lap, they would have got exactly the same time. Exactly the same, down to the thousandth of a second, which is incredible. Verstappen, of course, would have still got pole because he set his lap first, but it just shows how hard the two of them were really fighting for that pole position. And that was probably, in many ways, a highlight of the weekend as a whole, was watching qualifying, because this is an amazing track for qualifying. It has a Monaco-esque quality to it, that you are watching them push it to the absolute limit, and it must be quite a scary track to really throw it around in places. So, that was probably one of the highlights of the weekend, watching that battle. we move on to the next talking point then, which is kind of a reasonable follow-on for me, which is that I wanted to just talk about Zandvoort, the track in general, because of course it's been a little while since we've been there. Neither of us were alive the last time there was a race in Zandvoort, but 1985 it would have been. I think the last pole would have been PK, and Niki Lauda was the winner of that race. So it's been a little bit of a while there. Overall, I think we got what I sort of expected, which was a strategy battle over everything else. But I think we also saw more overtaking than I expected as well. It wasn't completely barren and a total procession. Fans were told not to bring flares, which obviously was never going to happen. There's always not going to be adhered by absolutely everyone. And of course, with Zandvoort, we have the reversal of Silverstone because it's Verstappen's time to be at home. And I thought both drivers were very respectful, both on track and in interview between Verstappen and Hamilton. I was worried that there was potential that a certain malaise might start to sour the mood a little bit after that incident there. But, they're true professionals. They've moved on, and both of them are setting a really good example there. So that was good to see. And, we got an interesting strategy battle from the track as well, because it has these unique banked corners that seem to affect the tyres in a way that maybe teams hadn't quite expected. We got very, very different stories of tyre experiences across the grid. Some people were happy with mediums and hards. Some people hated the mediums and hards. What do you make of this track and the general kind of new experience that we got from the Dutch Grand Prix this weekend, fans included?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the fans made this an absolute spectacle of an event. Now, we've gone to Monza in the past. Well, we haven't, but we've seen Monza in the past and the Tifosi. We've seen the British fans in Silverstone. And, those are some huge crowds which get pulled in and some massive amounts of support.
Brazil,
and then we go, and Brazil. And then we go to the Dutch Grand Prix, and it's just amplified by 100 times. Every single person was wearing an orange shirt, bar a couple, like orange flags, Max Verstappen flags, capes, hats, flares, even though they were disallowed, like you said. Watching it was absolutely thrilling just to witness like the first Dutch Grand Prix with Max in the lead, and obviously Max winning it, and just the atmosphere I thought was absolutely fantastic. The track itself, I love. Now it's very, like you said, it's very Monaco-esque. It doesn't really promote overtaking that much, but the undulation, the elevation, the banked corners, the different lines going into turn 3, turn 13 on the exit, or turn 14 provide so much like speculation, and just it was just amazing watching cars do what they were doing around this track, especially in qualifying. Seeing them go at max performance around this track, absolutely flying up and down around these corners was amazing. Going into turn 3 on the first lap, you had cars hugging it on the inside of the corners. You had cars in the middle of the corner. And then you had Fernando Alonso on the top of the corner, almost on like the advertising on the floor, like absolutely hanging it around. And I thought, when do we ever see that kind of line, or those lines being permitted? It was just wonderful. Yeah, I kind of wish the track was a little bit wider in some places to allow a little bit more overtaking. But like you said, despite that, we actually had a fair bit of overtaking. The majority of it has come from Sergio Perez, who has a bit of a reputation from starting from the back of the grid in the best car and working his way through, which is fantastic. And we'll get on to Perez later on and how potentially he shouldn't be starting at the back of the grid and helping his teammate out. But yeah, what a track. I think the fans made it an absolute experience. And I mean, we're British and we support British drivers. I mean, we support Formula One as a whole, but I never thought I'd say to myself, actually, I would love to go to the Dutch Grand Prix just for the atmosphere. I mean, I'd be supporting Hamilton and Norris and Russell, and but just to be amongst the Max fans would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it was like a big beach party, wasn't it? With cars going past every now and again.
Yeah.
They certainly had the sort of cohesion amongst the fans, didn't they? Like you said, lots of people wearing orange and the smoke and everything. So the British Grand Prix, for it, as a comparison, obviously there's lots of fans there and it's still very wild and exciting, but maybe there isn't that same uniformity
Yeah.
across them, which certainly at the Dutch Grand Prix, it made it quite an impressive spectacle. So yeah, the end result was a lot of fun. Kudos to the Dutch fans for putting on a great event. And a little random interesting stat about this Grand Prix as well, which I've put it in my notes here. I couldn't find somewhere else to put it, so I'm just going to mention it now. There hasn't been a single 1-2 for a constructor this season.
Has there not?
So it's the longest run without a 1-2 for a constructor since 2012, where it took 16 races.
Blimey.
So thanks to Gio's Love 97 via Reddit for that one. Thought that was interesting that it really has been up and down. And I think it's also the longest streak for Mercedes without a win for some time.
They must be on 4 or 5 now.
Yeah, so it's quite the stretch for Mercedes that they're not used to. So
yeah,
little stat that I just poked in there.
So just quickly on the back of the circuit, and we're talking about the circuit's characteristics and the track as a whole. In practice and qualifying, we saw multiple red flags and people going off and causing incidents. But the race, surprisingly, and I don't know how, but ironically, just like the Monaco Grand Prix, we didn't have a single safety car or a red flag. What do you make of that? Because I was expecting it. It was almost guaranteed given the statistics going into the previous sessions.
Well, I guess we're watching the pros here. We're watching the people that are capable of making that happen. I can only say they must go into it fully aware of those risks and just be hyper aware of them. Maybe it's the less enclosed tracks where drivers tend to get a little bit. They feel more comfortable getting a bit more argy-bargy with each other. I don't know, but coincidence. Deliberate, who knows? But certainly, I can only say that the professionals are at work, and as a result, we saw it was kind of nice not to have a too interrupted race, really. It can get a bit frustrating when the red flags start coming out and you're thinking, when's the race going to start again? So we didn't have that in stark contrast to the previous week.
Yes, I was just about to say, in comparison to Belgium, I did not have to spend 5.5 hours sat in front of my TV wondering whether the race was going to start. So I was very happy that we actually got some racing. And that's a brilliant segue, actually. You mentioned about cars being argy-bargy, and I wanted to talk about the back of the grid for a while. We don't usually talk about these drivers because 9 times out of 10, the TV coverage doesn't really do them justice or doesn't really promote them. So let's talk about Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher.
Well, they're getting a second look in today.
Yes, exactly. So, Hash, thank you very much for the money, and we'll continue to talk about your drivers.
I don't think they can afford to pay even us off, to be honest.
Absolutely
we're really
not.
cheap. We're dead cheap. Honestly.
Yeah. A couple of quid, that's all we need per month. Right, so back to it. Have you seen the video, or did you watch it on screen, of Nikita and Mick going down the pit straight and getting a little close to the pit lane entrance?
There was a point where I think Schumacher got past Mazepin briefly, and there was a bit of he tried to make a bit of a sudden move to block him. He certainly wasn't the only person who did that during the race. I think Stroll did it to Vettel later on as well. And there's a little bit of that going down that pit straight just because it was so crucial to overtaking. So they had a little bit of a moment there.
But I feel like this is, and I haven't seen the Stroll one and Vettel one, but this really stood out. And I've seen post-interview stuff after the race about what both drivers think, and obviously the reaction online as well. So for those of you who haven't seen, let me just run through it. So you've got where am I? So Mick got quite a good exit out of turn 14. Obviously it's a banked corner. He's tucked up real close behind Nikita. Mick pulls out of the slipstream of Nikita, who is on the left-hand side of the track, and starts to close up as Mick pulls to the right. Nikita makes a sudden move to the right-hand side of the track, which forces Mick to go further right. And then Nikita continues to point his car in the right-hand direction, which actually forces Mick Schumacher into... They know how the pit lane peels off to the right-hand side, and you've got the racetrack and the pit lane, but it's actually separated by some artwork on the tarmac. And at the end of that artwork, there's a bollard. Now, Nikita actually forces Mick onto that artwork going down the pit straight until Mick comes off the throttle and obviously tucks back behind Schumacher and then eventually makes the pass into turn 1. But he was so narrowly close. And I watched the replay back a couple of times because it's on F1.com under the recent the news and the post-interview stuff. And I've played it back in like 25% speed, and Mick had to have his whole tyre on this part of the track, which isn't part of the track. And also there's a bollard there as well, which we know these bollards get taken out all the time, but it can cause damage to the car, sorry. But it's just, from my personal experience or my personal thoughts are, it's just not safe. That was not a move I think Nikita should be pulling off. And I think that's been echoed throughout the post-race discussions with obviously Schumacher and obviously what we've seen online. Now, I think it was a step too far. You're allowed to change direction once under braking, but it wasn't under braking. But excessive weaving on the start-finish line is also can be flagged to the stewards. And Schumacher seems to think it was very dangerous. And actually, a couple of journalists have turned around and said it was beyond dangerous and it shouldn't be happening at all. I just wondered what your thoughts and opinions are, because obviously at the start of the season, one of your wild predictions were, or one of your more safer predictions were, that Nikita might end up causing problems or, driving dangerously. And I think it was getting banned for a race.
Yeah, I think a one race ban was what I predicted.
Yeah, like in previous seasons. But this for me was pretty close to the line. And what's your thoughts, really? Sorry for waffling on there, everyone.
No, you've certainly given analysis there. I can't remember exactly what happened, so I'll have to try and watch it back after this. But it sounds like the kind of move that Mazepin has made in the past. He's certainly not the only person to make a similar move this weekend, but you don't really want to be doing that to your teammate. I can only assume that has contributed to why it's not necessarily been reported to the stewards, perhaps, because Haas would be reporting their own car to the stewards. So I can't imagine they would want to do that. So that's possibly why it's gone a little bit under the radar. It's hard to know, because if it's not being reported in that way, then the stewards themselves may not necessarily spot it, and thus nothing will be done about it. And a team, like I say, they're not going to report their own car, so it's hard to say
very true.
what you can do about that. But certainly, just from the information alone, it sounds like it should be at the very least, some kind of like a black and white flag pointing out the danger of the move and that they'll be watching it. And I think. I hope that they're keeping an eye out for those kind of moves, because there's a difference between holding an aggressive line and forcing a car, or maybe blocking a car and picking your line as you enter a corner. But if you're weaving across a straight in order to force someone off the track at those kind of speeds, generally speaking, that's considered pretty unsporting. And I think of the example with Schumacher and Barrichello in possibly 2012 or 2013, or no, it must be 2012 or 2011, I think. But it's in Hungary, and Barrichello is going past Schumacher on the straight. And as he tries to cut into the inside, Schumacher is very slowly moving this way towards him. And there's like no space between him and the wall. Barrichello was calling for a black flag for Schumacher for that one, his old teammate. That's pretty close. Pretty close call. Fair play to Barrichello for keeping his foot in it there. It's a very similar incident. I can't remember if there was ever a penalty for it, but that is the sort of thing that people will try and do to put people off at what is otherwise a very simple overtake. So penalties, hard to say if it's not being spotted, and when it's between teammates like that, you're relying on the team to report their own driver, basically. Yeah,
that's fair enough, and that's good. You should definitely watch it back after the race, and
I'll have a look. Yeah,
after the race, after the podcast, and let me know what you think. But I completely agree. It relies on the teammate. It relies on the team flagging the incident out to the FIA, and they're certainly not going to do that as part of their own team or for their own driver. So they'll probably deal with it internally. But I certainly know Mick Schumacher was not too pleased about the incident, and doesn't want. He said it wasn't the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last time. And I have a feeling that those two drivers are falling out of love with each other quite quickly.
There's clearly some animosity there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I don't think their seats are confirmed for next year, are they? At the moment, the two Haas drivers.
So, no.
So stay tuned for that RPM roundup. I'm sure we'll cover that when and if it gets announced anytime soon. But that's all from me for the Nick and Nikita. Now we'll focus on some other stuff.
I want to talk about our sort of continuing topic of McLaren v Ferrari.
Okay.
Because on the face of it, this weekend is a big win for Ferrari, really, as they now take third place in the Constructors. Sainz, just looking at the drivers specifically, Sainz missed out to Alonso at the very end of the race. and seemed very happy. Seemed very unhappy in general in his post-race interview. He also struggled. He put it in the wall in FP3. He struggled in qualifying, he said as well, although he did actually qualify pretty well in the end. I think he was P6. Yes, he was.
Yep.
And so that was kind of a positive start for Ferrari. They were in formation for qualifying, and it was looking pretty good with Norris obviously out in Q2 and Ricciardo actually out qualifying Norris for 2 races straight. Actually, I think that is now in Belgium as well. He out qualified him, and so it was lining up for a good race for Ferrari. But Sainz afterwards didn't seem very happy. He said it was sliding around all the time. I don't think he enjoyed the hards, enjoyed going for the longer stint. But I thought that both Ferraris were pretty solid throughout, did very well to hold formation for most of the race, even though neither of them could actually make any advance on Pierre Gasly ahead. McLaren, on the other hand, just very, very disappointing weekend overall. Obviously I mentioned Ricciardo out-qualified Norris for once, so that was nice, but Lando lost out partially because of the red flag and also had a poor first run in Q2. And Ricciardo was faster in Q1 as well, so it wasn't an anomaly. It was a general trend of pace, it appeared. And when it came to the race, Norris had brilliant pace after he was released into some clear air after his pit stop, and was in a completely different league to his teammate, who later had to let him past about lap 47 for P10 at the time, I think. But just neither of them could do anything to hold off Perez, really, which was a bit frustrating. I thought it was interesting that the two of them, Norris and Perez, that is, had a very similar incident in many ways at turn 1 as they did in Austria.
Yes.
Because Perez went round the outside, they had a bit of a bump, and they made contact twice, and one of them was pretty heavy, probably in many ways a heavier contact than it was at Austria, especially if you look at the onboard. And Checo lost some aero bits on the side, but no penalty here.
Yep.
Because there's actually grass on the side there, so I think he was bumped slightly onto it and was able to keep going. But if there had been gravel like there was in Austria, the outcome would have been quite different. So no penalty here, but 5 seconds in Austria. So I think not giving a penalty is the right call. But again, interesting that a very, very similar incident, and perhaps with even far more damage to that Red Bull than it was in Austria. Interesting incident between the two of them, but it wasn't enough to stop Perez ultimately. So it was pretty disappointing. Advantage to Ferrari here. The only good news that I can take out of it really for myself, supporting McLaren, is that Monza is next, and that's probably more McLaren favourable overall. What did you make of the sort of power rankings between McLaren and Ferrari this weekend?
It was interesting given that coming out of the summer break, they were tied on points in the Constructors' Championship. And then I looked at Belgium and I thought, actually, there's no point looking at the results of Belgium because that's not on race. That was just purely on qualifying. So we're not quite sure how each car has improved over the summer break. So coming into Zandvoort, I thought this will be a real tell to see which team has done the most work. But equally, it's a very track-specific, car-specific track, isn't it? Like it is Monaco, it's single flowing, single file. But yeah, it was a shame. Ferrari coming out on top with 16 points for the day, and McLaren just scoring the 1. So quite a significant difference right there. Like you said, I do feel like McLaren will bounce back in Monza, which is probably where Ferrari need to be even stronger. But I think it will. The playing field will even out throughout the rest of the season, like it has done throughout the whole season so far. It's interesting because I feel like the Ferrari drivers are very consistent with one another, aren't they? Like they both score an equal amount of points. They're very close in the championship together. Just trying to get the results here now. But I know they're pretty close in the championship together. Whereas McLaren have Norris, who's doing probably 70% of the work, as in like points wise, compared to Daniel, who's only picking up a handful of points here and there. Now, it's nice to see that Daniel's actually picked up the pace a little bit in the last couple of races. Just before the summer break, Belgium, he qualified quite well, scored some points, and obviously he's out-qualified Norris in the Dutch Grand Prix, which is great. But that just needs to be a little bit higher, doesn't it? They need to be qualifying in the top 6, really, to start taking the fight. So that's where the inconsistencies are at the moment. Ferrari are very consistent with one another, but Lando and Daniel aren't, and I think that's where we might struggle. And I say we, as McLaren fans, we might struggle throughout the rest of the season. We just need Daniel to pick it up ever so slightly, and we should be in with a good battle with Ferrari. It's been exciting throughout the year so far. I'm gutted that Ferrari have taken the lead, but I'll be even happier when McLaren bounce back and have a fantastic 1-2 finish in Monza.
That might be a little optimistic, but well, it wasn't too far off last time, was it? Science in
No.
But certainly a more favourable race. It's great to have the competition. Really, it's great that there's a fight for it because it will push both teams harder, and ultimately we'll hopefully get to see. I want to see a bit more of a direct battle between them. Really, that's the thing. Is that obviously a lot of it has been a bit separate from one another, and various results happening here. And I want that excitement of, when you see, for example, a battle on track where it's like back in the day when we used to have like Mercedes, Ferrari. I want to see McLaren, Ferrari, something like that.
Absolutely.
Actually have a battle going on there. That'll be exciting. So maybe we'll get a bit more of a direct competition going forward.
Yeah, because at the moment there always seems to be a couple of cars between the two teams, doesn't there? Either one team's doing quite well riding in 3rd and 4th or 4th and 5th, and the other team's back down in 8th and 9th or 7th and 8th, and there's always a couple of cars in between, so we don't get to see that on-track battle. But actually, we want to see that on-track battle, like you said, and it would be great to see the two legends of a team going up against each other on track. Absolutely.
Right, what have you got for us next?
I'm going to dive into Mercedes, but not Lewis and Mercedes and the race and the strategy Mercedes. I'm going to talk about Bottas and his performance this weekend and how and what it does for the team. Now, I think Bottas got away with it quite luckily this weekend, actually, because Perez had such an underwhelming performance. The spotlight wasn't too much on Bottas when his pace wasn't there during the race. But he ultimately dropped back probably 25 seconds within half the race, or within a third of the race distance. He was already a pit stop clear of Hamilton. Hamilton could box and Max could box, and they could come out ahead of Bottas, which was it's not great to see that pace difference, is it? But let's move on towards the end of the race, and Bottas comes in on a couple of laps before the end, and comes in for new tyres, and then goes out and is seemingly going to set the fastest lap of the race. At the time, it was broadcasted that Lewis, Bottas is coming in, and everyone's thinking, right, he's going to go for fastest lap because he's got a clear pit stop window behind him. He's not going to catch Lewis at this rate because he was 30 seconds behind. Who's going to come in and secure that fastest point for Mercedes, even though Lewis already held that fastest lap of the race, and if no cars were going to box, it was probably going to stay with Lewis. Interestingly, Bottas is on his second lap outside of his pit stop, and has gone purple sector 1 and purple sector 2. Over the radio, we have that famous Valtteri, it's James. Please abandon your fastest lap. Now, we saw this, or we heard this on the radio whilst Bottas was in sector 3. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a delay with the radio, like we've come to learn with Formula One. It's probably happened like 10, 15, 20 seconds ago. So I fully expect that radio message to have been through the end of sector 1 or sector 2 once Bottas has set those fast sector 1 times, or halfway through sector 2, and it's looking like he was going to get fastest lap. So Bottas, for whatever reason, completed his lap, and he did go fastest despite the team orders. Now, it's unclear, or I'm unclear, whether Bottas actually slowed down or not on the start-finish line. The commentary team seemed to think he did, but again, there was no live pictures, there was no on boards with him. It was,
he did have a much slower third sector. I think he had a really bad third sector, so I think he might have slowed down a little bit.
It was a bad third sector, but I still think he was still purple in sector 3. He was only just purple in sector 3 instead of 8 tenths faster than what he was, in sector 2 and sector 1. So he completed the fastest lap, and then obviously got the extra point, only for Lewis to box the next lap and then retake that fastest point away from Bottas. Interestingly, Lewis on the radio says, "I need this extra point." So Lewis is already doing the calculations in his head. Max is going to win the race. We need to secure an extra point. We need to, as in Lewis needs to, I need to, instead of my teammate having it. So that's why they boxed him. Whether they were going to already box him or not, I don't know. But since Bottas seemed to take that point away from Lewis had no choice but to box and take that point back. Very interesting. It's team orders, but to a level which I don't think we've seen before, really. We've seen team orders like Lando and Daniel doing the old switcheroo on track. And we've seen team orders where Lewis was coming by Bottas in Spain, and it took Bottas a couple of corners to let Lewis go, or Bottas didn't let Lewis go until a really awkward corner. But this is a new level. This is not for position, it was for fastest lap, which I don't think we've seen really before, telling someone to slow down, to abandon his fastest lap attempt. I mean, he's well within his right to go as fast as he wants. He's got a fresh set of tyres, but having to give that up for Lewis Hamilton really set the tone for the race and for what was announced a day or two after.
Yeah, it was Bottas showing a little bit of fire for once, maybe, because he was told that they weren't going for the fastest lap, and he did say, "Oh, why?" I can't remember what the reason they gave him now, but they didn't mention. It wasn't about points, I don't think.
No,
it was something to do with like tire safety or something like that. It was some nonsense reason, basically.
Yeah.
And so Bottas kind of went for it anyway, which I was glad to see. I was glad to see Bottas going for a bit of a last hurrah, given what we know now about him going to Alfa Romeo. And it's come a bit too late, really. I was hoping Bottas might show a little bit more of that fire a bit earlier on, but no, he sort of possibly maybe did a little bit of what he was told, but ended up setting the fastest lap anyway, and Lewis did it anyway. I mean, this kind of ties into, because of what I was obviously going to mention Mercedes as well, but I think to talk about Mercedes, we also have to talk about Red Bull and how their strategies worked against each other, because they were in a 2v1 battle, Mercedes, but they just couldn't match Verstappen or Red Bull. Because right at the beginning, Max and Lewis were right out in front as expected. Max seemed, pretty untouchable in the opening stages. He was pulling away quite comfortably. Bottas was told on lap 18, they said, at this pace, we're not going to interact with the leaders, which not only had to sting, but despite Valtteri himself actually leading the race fairly briefly, also turned out to be pretty accurate as Verstappen sailed past him on much fresher tyres, and Bottas then almost immediately moved aside to allow Lewis to continue to give chase. So Bottas had already been dealt a bit of a blow over the radio, basically saying you're too slow to be in a chance to do anything meaningful in this race, so get on with it, or we're just going to explore. Well, this was interesting because it seemed like there was a few strategy issues here, because it seemed like they were trying to explore a one-stopper for Bottas because of the pace. At the beginning, it seemed that way, but it never quite emerged as a real possibility, it felt like, or at least not in a way that would be meaningful to the result of the race. And they had pit issues too. Hamilton had a slow first stop. It was like 3.6 seconds. Didn't really understand why, just a bit slow. Came out into a lot of traffic after his second stop, which he was obviously not very happy about. And then Bottas also had an inexplicable 5-second pit stop for his second stop. Again, not sure why. He was just sat there, all the tyres were on, everything had been done, and he just sat there, and the light obviously didn't change until much later. So Mercedes had all sorts of issues in the pit lane on Sunday. And of course, overall, for Red Bull, the Red Bull looked the faster car over the weekend. Perez was really cutting through the field, very comfortable once he eventually seemed to get the hang of it. He had a bit of trouble at first. But Mercedes were also a bit inconsistent as well. So that strategy battle that took place here at Zandvoort, it just didn't seem to go Mercedes' way at all. They just didn't seem to get a handle of it, despite having this 2v1 situation. They just couldn't do anything with that.
Yeah, they seemed to try everything with their disposal. They went from a 1-stop to a 2-stop to a 3-stop, and nothing they did could match the Red Bull's pace, its traction, its cornering speed. Like, Max was untouchable this race. He led from the very start. Like you said, he lost a couple of laps to Bottas in the pit stop phase, but every time Lewis got close, even within a second, Max would pull out a couple more seconds, and then Max was on the radio towards the end of the race, expecting Lewis to be closer. And I think he said, "Is there something wrong? What's Lewis saying?
Is he complaining about tyres?
Is he complaining about tyres?" Which obviously he is.
And then he said, "Of course he was."
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the tyres are dead. Purple sector, purple sector, purple sector. But yeah, Max was as surprised as Lewis was, and I think, yeah, it was really interesting. And again, coming out the summer break, a lot of teams would have done a fair bit of work on their cars when they were allowed to. And it would have been interesting to see in Belgium who had the faster car on these hugely long straights. But we didn't get to see that due to the rain. And coming into the next race, Red Bull seemed to have the upper hand. Like you said, Mercedes should have had the strategy cards all out on the table. They could do whatever they wanted because they had a car in P2 and P3, and it was theirs to lose. was theirs to win, and they decided not. They just decided not to do anything about it. They really, really struggled. Everything they did, Red Bull covered off, and it just seemed impossible. I did find it funny how
honest,
Bottas.
I think that. Sorry, just quickly to add on to that as well. Also, I think as well as Mercedes trying to add things on, it's perhaps emblematic of the decision that they have now made that Bottas did not give them that option. Because if Bottas had been closer to Hamilton, it would have been that much harder for Verstappen to do anything about it. So, yeah, that certainly was a big impact as well, because Bottas was sort of on his own and doing his own thing until he led the race briefly and was then overtaken again. He just didn't...
Yes.
His engineer was spot on. Like, he just didn't really interact with the leaders because of his pace.
Yeah, and Bottas could have really played a worldie of a card and held up Max for a lap or two, or a far more laps than what he did. I think he went deep into turn 12, which is just before the final banked right-hander, which gave Max a fantastic exit and then tucked up behind him like Schumacher did on Nikita Mazepin, and managed to get a brilliant run down the pit straight and then just overtake him. So actually, not only did Bottas not have the pace, he then didn't defend anywhere near as well as he should have done or would have been expected to do.
Not a defender, is old Valtteri, is he?
Yeah, it's a shame because when you talk about Bottas, and we have done a lot in the last 2 years, unfortunately, someone should make a montage one day of everything we've said about him. But he doesn't go for the attack. He doesn't go for the bold moves, but he also doesn't defend very well. He's just a solid second driver in what has been the fastest car on the grid for multiple years, and now he's really suffering given that it's not the fastest car on the grid. I looked at a statistic the other day. Now, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but now that Bottas has been announced for Alfa Romeo, loads of statistics have been flying out about his career with Mercedes, and he's only won 9 races in 5 years with Mercedes. That really summarizes up Bottas's 5-year stint with the fastest car on the grid. He's just not put it where he needs to go. It's a real. In some aspects, he has. He's put it P2 multiple times and put it P3, and they've won consecutive world championships. But yeah, it's just a little bit underwhelming, unfortunately. But he's on to new things.
Yeah, because looking at the record, he, like you say, he has done what has been asked of him, which is to be the wingman.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think, as we mentioned before, when your car is super dominant, you can afford to have a driver who is just kind of the good wingman. But when you're in an actual technical battle with your rivals and they've potentially got a better car than you, that's perhaps why they've taken that decision to get Russell in and to have 2 much more competitive drivers. Because Bottas is not a bad driver. Like he's good, and he's been able to match Hamilton quite a few times in qualifying. There's also the aspect that obviously Mercedes know that Lewis has the consistency. They might be favouring him for the championship chances given results and the like, which will have affected Bottas's ability to win races maybe. But the main reason is just the guy's overall pace. So they're shaking things up now, and as you said, Bottas is going on to pastures new. Maybe we'll see a Gasly-esque revival from the man. I hope so. It'd be nice to see Alfa Romeo do well, if nothing else, to have them come back into it.
And of course, we have no idea who his teammate will be in the future because Alfa Romeo have only confirmed Bottas now, and Giovinazzi, as much as I think he's done a stellar job this weekend, and there's probably, if he does this another couple of weeks on the trot, he could be in a chance of keeping his seat. But for the rest of the season, it's been a little bit underwhelming, and his seat might be up for grabs. But don't want to dive into that too much because I'm sure we'll talk about that outside of this podcast and do an RPM roundup. But yeah, Mercedes had it all to lose this weekend. They had the cars in the right place, and they just didn't capitalize on it at all.
So talking about Mercedes and touching on Red Bull, you were going to talk about Perez and, of course, his fight through the field. We've seen him do this quite a few times now, battling through the field. He probably provided the vast majority of the overtakes on the day. It was a good performance overall. He did take a bit of time to get into it. He had that big flat spot where he was trying to overtake Schumacher and a massive lock-up and had to pit again. Yeah. And then he seemed to struggle for a bit there, and eventually he got some pace, and then he started cutting through the field and did very well by the end of it. Like the final result to get to where did he end up? He
ended up in P8, and he started in P16.
Yeah, well, he started from the pit lane, didn't he?
Did he?
Or did he start? Oh no, sorry. Yeah, he started from the pit lane. Yeah, because he qualified P16, but didn't he take an engine? Take a
Oh,
new
he
engine?
did. Yes, he did.
So he started from the pit lane.
So he actually
and
overtook
ended
12
up P8.
cars. Yeah.
So
well,
he did do very well, but he does have the fastest car on the grid, so he bloody well should be making up that many paces, even if it is a difficult track to overtake at. So, and of course, really, he shouldn't be starting from that far back. The pit lane is because of engine things, but it shouldn't be P16. It should be much higher up. He should be battling with Bottas for that second row.
Yes, and this is what I mean. So Red Bull and Mercedes are in this tightly knit, fascinating, thrilling battle for both championships at the moment. But both of these teams have drivers who just aren't helping their number one drivers at the moment. And I know no team has a number one driver, but let's just pretend that Max and Lewis are the number one drivers.
No number one driver.
Let's just pretend that Max and Lewis, aren't the number one drivers and they're all on equal footing. Why isn't Bottas helping? Why isn't Bottas being the wingman he needs to be this season? And Perez, I know he's new to the car and he should be feeling a lot more relaxed now because actually he's secured a deal for next year as well, which is fantastic because, his predecessors, all 130 of them who Red Bull have gone through in the last 2 years, haven't secured contracts for the following year. And, here Perez is doing a much better job, more consistent, is really, racing hard, which is fantastic. But that hard racing we're seeing is from the back of the grid. And what we want to see is Mercedes, Red Bull, or vice versa. Like you alluded to with the Ferrari-McLaren battle, we need to see these 4 cars fighting for the top 3 positions or the top step of the podium, not just letting it be 2. Long gone are the days where... Do you remember when Mercedes and Ferrari were always fighting back in 2016 or 2017? It was, Mercedes, Ferrari, and it was just battle upon battle, and it was like, oh, they're in a Mercedes sandwich. Oh, now they're in a Ferrari sandwich. Oh, what are they going to do? They're going to go for the undercut. Oh, that car's going for the overcut. It was amazing. But we don't hear any of that now because it's just 2 drivers who are 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds ahead of the whole field. And they can do whatever they want because they're so far ahead. Let's get these other drivers, not second place drivers. Let's get Sergio and Bottas or whoever it will be next year. Well, we know it's going to be George, but let's talk about this year. Let's get these drivers back up to the top of the field and let's have a massive battle towards the end of the season because I don't want the Constructors' Championship to be decided by the poor performance of a number 2 driver.
And who was in that P4 that Perez should have been occupying? It was Pierre Gasly.
Exactly.
In the AlphaTauri, which tells another story as well, doesn't it? Given he's presumably wants to get back into a Red Bull. He wants to show what he's made of and get back into a potential race-winning car again. And that AlphaTauri is a good car. Pierre Gasly is proving that it definitely has pace. But it's probably not where he wants to be in the long run. He probably wants to be somewhere a bit more competitive, a little less ostensibly junior as AlphaTauri is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting tale there, and we've not quite seen that top 4 battle that we thought that we might. So it'll be interesting to see if Perez can turn things around. Like you say, he has the safety net of knowing that he's going to be there next year, but hasn't Perez done net? Well, yeah, difficult to. I don't think Red Bull knows what a safety net is. It's just not in their dictionary, is it? They it's becoming a slightly. It's kind of impressive, but in a way, it's unnecessary that he should be fighting his way all the way from the back. And it's Sergio Perez has overtaken an Aston Martin, or he's overtaken a Williams or something. And it's like, yeah, that's great, mate, but they're not really the people you should be battling with. And he's still got a little bit of development to go through with that car, clearly. Right, let's move on to, I think this is my last talking point now, just a quick one to touch on. Aston Martin, overall, seeming to have a little bit of a struggle again on this track. Just when you think that they're gaining a little bit more pace and they're gaining a little bit more consistency, it just seems to fall away again. They don't seem to have a handle on that car. I've no idea what that car's strengths are. No idea. Do you remember when I said that I was worried they were going to be big rivals to McLaren? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember those days.
They just made very little impact on the race, and they spent most of the race fighting Williams directly because Stroll was in a battle with Russell and Vettel was in a battle with Latifi. So that was where they were. They were fighting with Williams, and I don't mean that as a slight to Williams, because they've obviously, they've improved somewhat as well. But Aston Martin had all these we've got we've managed to nail this result last year, so we're going to try and improve, get on the podium, and they have got one podium technically. Vettel has obviously technically managed to get two himself, but it wasn't to be with the disqualification. The rules are the rules. But it's just so up and down. They struggled a lot in qualifying. Vettel obviously had an engine issue, FP1. And then both him and Stroll just didn't seem to make any impact on the race. They just didn't seem to have the pace. There was one period where Vettel seemed to have much better pace and was doing better on fresher tyres and with a bit of clean air, but it was far too late by that point, and they just made no real impact. And I just can't quite, like I said, I can't quite understand what the strengths of that car is and why they have so little consistency. Both cars outside the points. Sebastian Vettel, 17th. Just, and he had another spin as well, didn't he?
Yep.
That was of his own volition as well. I think that was another kind of just random spin. What is going on at Aston Martin? Why can't they find any consistency? They've had all these resources pumped into it, and they seem to be having a bit of a nightmare this season, I have to say.
Yeah, it's really strange because a lot of people compared this Zandvoort track very similar to Monaco. And of course, the Aston Martin and Vettel was one of Vettel's highlights this year. He finished quite high up in Monaco, scored some decent points. It was kind of like Vettel's back and he's happy to be racing. So I actually thought they were going to do all right this weekend, given the nature of the tight twists of this circuit. But like you said, they just struggled from the off and just really didn't have any pace at all. And to top it off, like you said, Vettel spun on his own accord going into turn 3. He went for the lower line and then just dropped it. And then Bottas was behind him and he had to take huge evasive action to avoid that car. And he did very well, to be fair, Bottas, to avoid that Aston Martin. He locked up in the process. But to have both Aston Martins lapped twice is not where you want to be. Like getting towards in the second half of your first season, it's not a great statistic at all. So they really need to bounce back. And I say they need to bounce back at some point in the next 9 races. I'm sure they will, because they do have races where they just seem to be touching McLaren and, are fighting the McLarens, which is mad when you think about it. But actually, today was just not one of those days for the Aston Martin guys and girls, because it was just shocking. Both of those cars lapped twice. They only completed 70 laps out of, I think, 72.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they finished 2 laps down. That's just shocking, isn't it? That's so bad.
Interesting stat, though, to add on to that as a interesting flip side to that, though, is that I believe that Sebastian Vettel has the most overtakes on track out of everyone so far.
He does.
Season, with 81, I think. So they're super inconsistent, but also Sebastian Vettel's doing a lot of overtaking, apparently. So it's funny how these stats work out.
Yeah, that just reminds me. Do you remember when George Russell made a PowerPoint presentation as to why he was the best rookie of the year? And he said, most consistent qualifying position, 19th. And it's like most places gained on lap 1. Hayes was like +2. Lando was -4. And I think Alex Albon at the time was like -10. Fact. I feel like this is one of those statistics which does do him justice. Like, yes, you are the best overtaker, or you have overtaken the most cars this year. But is it because you're not doing as well as you should do and you're overtaking slow cars?
That would be like us, our virtual sprint championship. It'd be like us saying, well, we've got the most overtakes out of anyone. It's like, well, we're starting from the back of the grid every single time. So maybe that comes into it to some extent. But and it's just an interesting little stat about Aston Martin, who they have these moments where it's, yes, we finally found some consistency, but I don't really know where their strengths are. And they're just so all over the place. And to have a race like this, it's not a good look. I mean, this is the first time McLaren have been a bit disappointing in a couple of places, but this is the first race that I can think of where it really was just overall lame. Like, I just didn't see McLaren fight for anything at any point. No. That's the first time I can think of, whereas a team like Aston Martin, it just keeps happening. So, yeah, they're going to have... Maybe they are throwing a lot into 2022. Who knows? Maybe we'll see that big revitalization.
But also, brand new track. The simulations weren't... They've got no historic data to go on. Practice was all stop and start, red flag constantly. Loads of drivers had issues. Sebastian Vettel being one of those drivers who had issues in practice, so really limited run time. Likewise with Lewis Hamilton, he was out of P2 quite early on, only after a couple of laps. So maybe that hindered them throughout the rest of the weekend, obviously with practice 3 only being an hour. So, it's all in proportion. Who knows? Like you said, it's well, we'll see. We'll see going forward to next week. Next week's the Temple of Speed. Let's see what car really has the fastest straight line speed.
Right, let's move on to our view from the stands and hear what our listeners and people on Twitter have got to say and your questions and comments. And this week we're going to start off with a comment that we actually got from the Hungarian Grand Prix, but we received it after the recording. And of course, we haven't done a post-race for Belgium. So this is from Kyle Arkless. We haven't forgotten you, Kyle. We're going to address this now. Interestingly, this is about Bottas, and so it's interesting that this is after we know that Bottas is going to Alfa Romeo, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Kyle's question was, is Bottas starting to crack under the pressure of losing his seat? And is this resulting in his poor form and mistakes, and should he have been given a bigger penalty? In my opinion, yes, he should, because he was careless and reckless and isn't helping his situation with keeping his seat, says Kyle. So this is obviously coming off the back of the Hungarian Grand Prix, to put it into context. This is after Bottas has had a bit of a mistake, turn 1, caused something of an incident. I think he ended up with a 5-place grid penalty for Belgium. That was what he ended up with, wasn't it? Did you, if you can, cast your mind back to before we heard about his move, do you get a sense that Bottas was cracking under the pressure, or do you think that he actually handles the pressure very well and that just genuinely is what he's capable of?
I think it's the latter, actually. Bottas, I don't think has ever really cracked under the pressure. We've never really seen him have an outburst or be outspoken towards the team or his teammate like Lico and Lewis did, perhaps, back in the day. But I think it's just that Bottas's performance is a little bit underwhelming, and now his seat. Well, at the time his seat was up, had a big question mark over it. People started assuming that his poor performance was because he was under pressure, but actually, I think it's just because he had a poor performance. And with regards to the start of the Hungarian Grand Prix, I mean, that's a huge mistake. I mean, Lance Stroll did exactly the same thing. We've seen Grosjean do the same thing at the start of a Grand Prix. We've seen Max and what was it, Singapore, where the two Ferraris came together with Max in the middle on going down the pit straight on the start. We've seen loads of cars have big accidents going into the first corner, and the weather was wet, so it was always going to happen. It just happened to be Bottas. One of those cars was going to outbrake itself and cause a collision. It just happened to be Bottas. So yeah, I think he handles pressure quite well. I just think his performance has been subpar this year.
Yeah, I have to agree that overall it does seem like Bottas actually handles pressure well, and that he seems to have a very calm demeanour and he has generally a good attitude towards it. But this is genuinely appears to be, at the moment, for whatever reason, his current form, like this is the best that he's capable of. It's an honest enough mistake, like you say, like he just got the breaking point wrong. It was unexpected wet conditions. So even knowing what we know now, I think that it's not that he's cracking under pressure per se. It's just that, it's poor form in general. As Kyle has correctly pointed out, though, he hasn't helped his situation in keeping his seat, because we now know he hasn't got that one anymore. As for the penalty, a 5-place grid penalty seems about right to me. I guess they could have slammed him with 10, but what he did, the punishment carried on into the next race, which is far more effective than, if he'd managed to carry on and they'd given him like a 5-second penalty or something, that wouldn't have really made
wouldn't have been
any
proportionate.
Difference. So in a way, the severity of the incident meant that the penalty was more proportionate, if that makes sense. But thanks for your question and your comments there, Kyle. We didn't forget about you. We got onto it in the end, and apologies for the delay in that. But thanks for getting in touch with us. Who is next?
Right, moving on to the next one, we have RPM legend Dave Doherty has got back in touch once again. Thank you so much, Dave, for being so consistent and also tweeting us your thoughts and opinions at the end of every single race. And then your question for this week for the Dutch Grand Prix is, what did you think of the strategy between Mercedes and Red Bull? Now, for a lot of people, the strategy was actually the highlight of the race, like we've spoken about already. There wasn't that much on-track action, so actually the pit wall strategy was probably the most interesting part of the race. We've already summarized it quite a lot. But Alex, did you want to just quickly go over it really quickly? What's your thoughts on the strategy? Who played it well and who didn't?
Well, all the consistency was in Red Bull's corner, really, because as we've said, Mercedes had an advantage. They were 2v1, but their pit stops were slow. They released Hamilton into traffic. They didn't have the pace to actually keep up with Verstappen. So even though Red Bull should have been vulnerable, and we've seen Verstappen be in that position so many times, where he's on his own and he's vulnerable because he doesn't have his teammate to help him, and Mercedes capitalise and they're able to beat him with it. This time it was the complete opposite of that. Verstappen was still on his own, but the Mercedes couldn't keep up with him. And it just seemed like, it felt like there wasn't really a strategy from Mercedes. That was the way that I felt. They were exploring this one-stopper with Bottas that never came out, and Hamilton was just giving it absolutely everything and letting them know when he needed to pit, which isn't really so much a strategy as just kind of survival, hanging on.
Yeah.
That was about all that they could do to stay with Verstappen. So to me, it just seemed like the strategy didn't end up being anything more than what was necessary for them to just stay in the race, because they had such confidence in Verstappen that he had the pace, whereas Mercedes had no strategy options to respond.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you very much, Dave, for getting in contact. Like I said, we always look forward to your tweets and keep them coming in.
Thanks very much, Dave. Last one then for this week is from another regular, Daniel Fergie25. Thanks very much for getting in touch. He asks, what was your favourite part of the race? Mine was the passion and energy of the Orange Sea as Supermax crossed the line to win. #MV33. Big Max Verstappen hyping there, and they had like a special banner over the start-finish line as well, like on the digital banner when Max crossed the line as well. So they were ready. Supermax was blasting out.
It was.
I'm pretty sure they could hear it all across the lowlands. What was your favourite part of the race, Shane?
My favourite part of the race was probably the opening couple of laps where we saw cars going 3x3 into turns 3 and on the final bank, going side by side into corners which did not allow cars for the rest of the race to go side by side. Lap 1, there was multiple bits of contact with cars dipping a wheel onto the grass, onto the curb, into the gravel, front wings potentially hitting tires, tires locking up. I thought it was amazing just to see all these cars, all 20 cars, go through lap 1 relatively safely. No one got hurt, no cars spun out, and it was just an absolute spectacle. Like you said, these are the best drivers in the world at what they do, and to get 20 cars around that track all in one piece for the opening couple of laps was pretty amazing. It was the most exciting part of the race for me. Also, just on the back of that, I can't believe there wasn't a safety car. I know I've already mentioned it, but unbelievable scenes. But yeah, also, Daniel, I completely agree. That Orange Sea, it was just spectacular. The amount of fans there was incredible. Obviously, like Alex has alluded to, not everyone got the memo about dropping it, not bringing flares to the track. I have to say, if I was a fan and someone lit a flare in front of me, I'd be a little bit disappointed, even if I was a Max fan, because you paid out all these euros to visit the Grand Prix if you're in the Netherlands and you're visiting the Zandvoort, and you get stuck behind some smoke which takes a couple of minutes to clear. I'd be absolutely gutted. But yeah, what a race! I think the fans definitely made it more than anything else.
Yeah, for me, I think two main ones that stick out to me are Bottas going for the fastest lap when he was told not to. I was there thinking, finally, go on, Bottas, stick it to him. Just do it anyway. Go for it. So that was good fun. And also, overtake of the race for me was actually Nicholas Latifi, who had an absolute banger to overtake Mazepin into the first corner, very, very smoothly around the outside. And Mazepin was a bit more respectful with Latifi than he was with his teammate. Left him enough room. Great overtake from Latifi. Really controlled bit of aggression to take that position. It was probably for like P6 P18 or something, P19 I think, because Latifi also started from the pit lane, I believe, because he had quite a lot of damage.
He did, yeah.
To his car. He actually qualified P14, but he started from the pit lane. So yeah, those two incidents to me are probably the highlights, plus the overall spectacle of the circuit and the fans. Definitely a unique Grand Prix, and I think it's really added itself to the calendar with quite a statement. So I'm sure it's a fan favourite that we could be looking forward to each year with any luck. But thanks very much, Daniel, for getting in touch. And you can always contact us with your questions and comments on Twitter at RacePerMinute. You can DM us on there or respond to our tweets directly, or you can email us info@raceperminute.com or go to the website on the contact page. So thanks very much.
Right, moving on to driver of the day and championship standings. Now, it was fairly obvious who was going to get driver of the day. It was either going to be Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez. Max for leading and winning his home Grand Prix, or Sergio Perez starting from the back of the grid and overtaking what felt like 20 to 30 cars to get where he was after a couple of pit stops. But Sergio Perez actually won driver of the day with the final vote. And I'm going to shy away from giving it to Sergio because he had a bad qualifying session. And it might not have been his fault, that he was let out of the pits late, but obviously we've already spoken about how he should have got to the grid quicker or should have done his outlap quicker. And I know he did the most overtakes this race, which is absolutely fantastic, especially given the circuit. But he also put himself in that position and he had the best car on the grid. So I'm going to give it to Max Verstappen. And previously, I've also said that I don't want to give it to the top drivers because they have to do something absolutely worldly to deserve it, like top every qualifying session, top all the practice sessions, etc., etc. But what Max did today, and we've already talked about strategy, so I won't talk about it for too long, is he held off two cars which are probably just as fast as the Red Bull, if not a little bit slower. But there was two cars, Lewis and Bottas, who could not touch Max at all. Max had that whole race under control from the second he drove off his starting box. He did not hesitate. He was already a couple of seconds out in front by lap 4 or 5, and it's a quick circuit as well. So to pull that distance is absolutely incredible. At no point did I think he had anyone in DRS range. It was crazy the amount of pace that guy had. So he deserves it in my opinion. Alex, over to you. Who are you going to award your driver of the day to?
Well, I'd have to venture a little bit of pedantry on my part to say that it is driver of the day, not driver of the weekend. So you're well within your right to give it to Verstappen in that regard, without whether or not he's done really well in qualifying or whatever. Because I think on the day, like you say, he was the fastest guy on track by some margin. So that's a perfectly well reasoned driver of the day in my opinion. Perez obviously did feel like it was the kind of standard consensus vote because he's done loads of overtaking. It's like the Formula One game, isn't it? They always give driver of the day to just whoever's gained the most places. So that kind of feels like who people tend to go for. Honourable mention for Gasly, who was the fastest of the one-stoppers and had the pace to comfortably keep the Ferraris behind. So I thought that was a great drive from him. I'm actually going to go with Fernando Alonso for my driver of the day, who drove very, very intelligently. He had a brilliant start to make up a couple of places at the beginning. He handled his tyres with his one-stopper really well, nabbed Sainz at the end, and easily had the measure of his teammate, who at one point was complaining that Alonso was too slow. And Alonso was like, I was just looking after my tyres. And so he was, he actually had both.
And then took off.
Exactly, yeah, because he had the pace and the tyre management to drive very, very well indeed. Started P9, ended up P6. He was giving it absolutely everything in that Alpine. And I think from everyone on track, he really impressed me today. So I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, two very good driver of the day awards, if I do say so myself. Now it's time to revisit the 2021 drivers' standings, which we haven't done for some time yet. And positions have changed, and now we've got awkward 0.5s at the end of some numbers as well, due to the fiasco, which was the Belgium Grand Prix. So I'm going to run you through the top 10, and then Alex can run you through the bottom 11, since now we've got Robert Kubica, who stood in for Kimi Räikkönen this weekend, who has scored 0 points, but he is now officially classified in the 2021 driver standing. So honourable shout out to Robert, who actually did a fantastic job beating both Haas drivers on track before they retired or before they had their own issues. Obviously stepping foot into a Formula One car for the first time in a couple of months or a year. I'm not quite sure when the last time he was in a Formula One car. Obviously within a short while because he has to keep his license up. But back to the standings, we've got Max Verstappen, who has retaken the lead of the 2021 drivers' standings with 224.5 points this season, with Lewis Hamilton with 221.5 points. I'm really glad that both of those drivers ended up on a 0.5 of a point at the Belgium Grand Prix, because if one of them wins by a 0.5, there would have been lots of questions asked whether points should have been awarded for the Belgium Grand Prix. And now hopefully those questions won't be asked unless they finish a couple of points away from each other. Then I'm sure questions will be asked.
Questions will be asked anyway.
Questions will be asked. Bottas is in P3 with 123 points after Lando Norris only scoring the single-digit point this weekend, who's currently in P4 with 114 points. Sergio Perez is on 108 points, with Charles Leclerc on 92 points. Carlos Sainz, like I alluded to earlier, very close to his teammate, 89.5 points. Pierre Gasly, 66 points. Daniel Ricciardo, 56 points. And Fernando Alonso, 46 points.
Yeah, we've got Gasly going up the table there. You've got Perez going up, Bottas going up. I'm kind of hoping that Norris can fight back for that P3 position. Bottas ruining my prediction of him finishing behind both Red Bulls.
Yeah.
And Perez at least is a little bit closer to where he should be, but points-wise is still far too far behind his teammate, really. But interesting top 10. Going on from Alonso, who was P10 then, who you said last. His teammate Ocon follows closely with 44. Actually very closely matched for points, those two as well. I have a feeling that deficit could widen given recent results over the course of the season. But Ocon, he's still shown some great skills, so I'm hoping that he keeps the fight there, keeps his teammate honest. Sebastian Vettel with 35, now doing much better than his teammate who's in 14th. And between the two Aston Martins, there's Tsunoda. Tsunoda has 18 points to his teammate's 66. Is that the biggest deficit between teammates? I feel like it might be. As a percentage, it almost
as a percentage, 100%, that is the biggest deficit. There are bigger deficits on points-wise, but we'll talk about that later on.
Well, Tsunoda's been confirmed for next year as well, so they obviously have enough faith in him to keep him for another year. I think overall he's been extremely disappointing.
Yes.
I know that he's a rookie, but that car has clearly got some pace to see what Gasly's doing with it, and he's miles behind. So I think Tsunoda is pretty lucky. Maybe it's something to do with the relationship with Honda. I don't know, but I think he's a lucky boy to keep hold of that seat. There must be quite a few people vying for an AlphaTauri right now. Moving on to P15, Russell with 13 points, obviously significantly boosted by the result in Belgium. And Latifi follows behind him on 16th place with 7 points. So those Williams flying in formation P15, P16. Didn't think we were going to say that this season, I must say. Raikkonen and Giovinazzi, the two Alfa Romeos, follow with 2 points and 1 point respectively. And then we have Schumacher, Mazepin and Kubica with 0 points. But it's nice to see an extra driver on it like we had Hülkenberg last time as he popped in. But it's still evolving, the drivers' standings. Let's move on to the constructors now. Mercedes are still hanging on. 344.5 points in first place. Red Bull following close by with 332.5. That battle of the wingmen that we've talked about before definitely coming into play there with the points tallies. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, Ferrari have taken third place now. 181.5 points, another 0.5 in the top standings there. It just feels wrong. Something about saying 0.5
really does.
Points, but half a point. But Ferrari taking third place. McLaren have to settle for fourth for the time being, 170. Alpine looking a little bit stronger. It looked like they were going to struggle a little bit more this season, and I think their goals at the beginning was to, try and prop up that middle of the table, as it were. They actually look a little bit more confident in doing that now, so 90 points for them, P5. AlphaTauri are very close behind, though, with 84, so take us through the bottom of the table.
Like you said, we've got Aston Martin with 53 points, really struggling this year. I'm not sure if they expected to be this far down. They were certainly very positive at the start of the year, weren't they? Especially with their press releases. It obviously being the Racing Point from last year, we expected bigger and better things from Aston Martin this year, but only 53 points in P7. Williams in P8 with 20 points. Like you said, who would have thought we would have been saying Williams in P8? Maybe we would have seen it with 4 or 5 points, but not with the 20 points haul they've managed to achieve over the last couple of races. Will they score any more points towards the end of the season? I wouldn't rule it out, not with Latifi and both Latifi and George qualifying quite well now. Like Latifi's put it in Q2 a number of times, which is a massive step up from the beginning of the season. Alfa Romeo on 3 points, and Haas have yet to score a point with 0 points, and I'm sure that will be the case for the remainder of the season, unfortunately.
Yeah, Haas have planted their flag in the bottom of the table.
And they're not going anywhere.
So, 0.5 points in it. That's what we could see if we end up... There might be another race where we end up with 0.5 points being given out. You just don't know. I certainly didn't see that coming in Belgium, so that's what we ended up with. That's what we ended up with there. So that's an interesting one. Right, thanks very much for joining us then. It's good to be back, isn't it, Shane? We haven't done this for a little while. We said at the beginning, do we remember how to do this? It's been about a month since we did an episode, so I think we've got through it all right. Do let us know what you think. Send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. Getting in touch at raceperminute.com, or you can comment below if you're on YouTube. If you enjoyed the episode, you can give us a rating or a like, all that usual clicking on things. And if you really like what we do, then you can consider subscribing to us wherever it is you're getting us. You're getting your podcasts, so you always get the episode straight to you. And you can also support us on Patreon, donating as little as £1 a month to help us keep it going. And thanks very much for everyone who continues to get in touch with us. We kind of had a little bit of a break ourselves through the summer break. So thanks everyone for coming back and listening. We've not disappeared. We haven't forgotten about you. Just having our own little summer break, weren't we?
Yeah, it was well needed actually, and I feel like we're going to be straight back into the thick of it with the rest of the season. Only 9 races to go, but they're going to come thick and fast, and I look forward to recording more podcasts with you and then rounding up the season towards the end. Obviously, we've had some driver announcements over the last couple of days, but moving forward, there's still a couple more seats up for grabs, and who knows who's going to end up in those seats. It's completely open. I haven't got a clue. The biggest secret in F1, which everyone knew, George Russell to Mercedes has been confirmed, but who's going to be going to Williams and who's going to partner Bottas in Alfa Romeo? And the Haas drivers, what's going to go on with those? I'm sure, who knows? It's all exciting.
There's just 8 or 9 races to go now, so it's going to come to a close sooner than you think.
Yep.
So it's really hotting up, the battle between Verstappen and Hamilton. I think we could see a lot of swapping at the top, so that's proving to be very exciting. Can't wait to cover it more. Italy next, Temple of Speed. It's always a pleasure to see Monza. It's always a pleasure. Could we see another Ferrari resurgence? You just don't know. They have surprised on more than a few occasions this season. They just occasionally seem to pop up, and like Leclerc leading the race in Britain. Like, where is that coming from? But they managed it, so who knows? Hopefully, Monza has some surprises for us. And we hope that you'll join us for that. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.